Welcome everyone to this Multi Academy about introducing to design thinking with Ananda Mele. We will give a couple of minutes until everyone just have enough time to join us. Meanwhile, I'm going to explain you just a little bit about Malt and or Malt Academies. For everyone who don't know, Malt is the biggest European platform for freelance. Moreover, we want to create a community of freelance where we can share, learn, and improve our and their professional career as a freelance. And right now we are a community more than 2,030 freelancers, so quite big. If some of you don't know us, I will invite you. I will give you my email to contact me if someone is interested to talk privately about the Malt and how we can help you to find projects and to make your life easier as a freelance. Apart from that, Malt Academy is an initiative that was born during the first lockdown in March last year, and we wanted to bring some good impact in a difficult situation. The aim of the Malt Academy is to give free access to knowledge to everyone and to try to keep something positive during this time. We know that for a freelance and for everyone, it's super important to keep updates in new features, in improvement, in new methodologies and technologies, and we want to give you access to this. Academy is open, so if anyone wants to be a speaker as Ananda or thinks that it can bring something to the community, feel free to reach us. In the web page of Malt Academy, you will find a form to give your information, and we will contact you. And apart from that, I will be on the chat. I will be answering all your questions if you have something related with the Malt or Malt Academies. Apart from that, I will give all the attention to Ananda, who is the expert and the one who is going to lead this Malt Academy. Welcome, Ananda.
Thank you, Magda. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this brief and practical introduction to design thinking. As you can see on your side, there's a chat. Feel free to send me a message to say hello. I'm going to try to ask you some questions as we go to keep this interactive, so feel free to answer there, and let's see if we can make this as smooth as possible. All right, so as you know, I'm Ananda. I'm a UX UI designer currently working for a digital design agency in Barcelona. It's true that my background is actually in business development and sales, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about design thinking in the Malt Academy for everyone to learn and understand. Contrary to what most people think, design thinking is not exclusive for designers. There's a lot of CEOs using it, marketeers, publicists, salespeople. It's actually one of the few processes out there that you don't need a lot of experience and a lot of techniques to apply it in your day-to-day life. So I hope that after this talk, you actually manage to implement this process into your work or into your personal life and make the best use of it. All right, so to get this going, I like to start from the beginning, of course. Even though it's really, really hard to track down where design thinking actually started, the roots of design thinking are definitely in the scientific method. If you haven't worked with scientific method before, it's quite simple. You usually come up with a hypothesis, you try it, and then you iterate it to validate it or not. And design thinking is essentially the same thing. The evolution of design thinking and design as a way of thinking was first described by Herbert A. Simon in 1969. He was a computer scientist, and for him it was important to create a science around design so that it was not only scalable, but it was also possible for people to solve problems without being a designer or without being an architect, for that matter. The design thinking that we know today, the process that we all know today, was first described and created by David Kelly. He's the founder of IDEO. If you don't know IDEO, I really, truly recommend you to look it up. It's an amazing company. And their main goal when they first created the design thinking process was to make it so natural and so easy to understand that absolutely everyone could apply it on their day-to-day lives. So what we'll be describing here comes from their process and their protocols. And I will try to use some of the tools and techniques that I implement in my day-to-day job, and that to me seem the easiest one to start implementing right away. If you have any questions, or if you feel that I left a tool that you already know or a process that you already know out, just write on the chat and we can certainly talk about this. So to get this going, I want to see if there's anyone in this chat that has never heard about design thinking before. You can just say yes, no, this is my first time. All right. Okay, Mohammed, I see you there. Perfect. Welcome. All right. Cool. So I hope you learned a little bit from this chat. And if not, I'm going to leave my contact afterwards, and I can send you more references so that you can research and discover a bit more in depth what this is about. Okay. Great. So according to Dave Kelly, the person that created the design thinking as we know, and I think this is the best definition of design thinking, design thinking is a deeply human process that taps into abilities that we all have, but get overlooked by more conventional problem-solving practices. It relies on our ability to be intuitive, to recognize patterns, and construct ideas that are emotionally meaningful as well as functional. What he means by that is that you don't need to be an expert to apply design thinking. What you essentially need is to be willing to find solutions to the problems that arise. In summary, design thinking is a protocol to creatively solve complex problems and discover new opportunities. So now we're going to dig into what it actually is and how you can actually apply it to your day-to-day life. I tend to speak very fast, so if you feel that I'm speaking too fast, just shout in the chat and I'll try to slow down a bit. Okay, so design thinking, so we have described what design thinking is, but I also find it important to describe what design thinking is not. So design thinking, different from what most people think, is not thinking outside the box. Thinking outside the box usually tries to make possible to prove ideas that are not valid. And design thinking goes a bit deeper than that. Design thinking is the idea that you're going to know so well the box that you're going to create solutions that fit it perfectly. I know that it sounds a bit stupid, but that's actually the case. You're going to understand this box inside out and all the ways around it, and the solutions are just going to perfectly fit into it. Another thing that design thinking is not is design. So design thinking is part of design, part of the design process. But in some cases, especially if you need a visual element to the solution that you're creating, you're probably going to have to hire a designer to do that part. It might be that you're applying design thinking to a solution that doesn't really need graphics or visual elements, so you can actually do it all the way to the end. But it's really important to remember that once you know design thinking, you're not going to become a designer, right? These are completely different things. Design thinking is not only a process, it's also a mindset. And I think this is really important to remember. As soon as you understand how you can apply these stages and these steps into your life, it's really nice to apply them all the time, because in general is a good way to relate to others, is a good way to solve any issues. I know people that use design thinking processes to solve their personal issues. So if they have a debt, or if they tend to be very late to arrive to their meetings, they use design thinking to find solutions. So you will see that it's actually super practical and it can solve almost anything. There are some cases of governments using design thinking to solve poverty and to solve hunger. And you know it's true that they haven't solved it 100%, but they're trying to find solutions using design thinking. All right. So let's get going. Let's dig into this. Design thinking is a 5-stage process. I have put them here in a sequential order, but it does not mean that you're going to apply them in a sequential way. It happens, especially in design teams, that some designers are doing just parts of this entire process. So the importance of knowing the entire process is that so you can communicate what you did to someone else, or to receive the information from someone else and then move on from there. The design thinking process is also iterative, which means you're going to go back to previous stages all the time. It happens sometimes that you create a prototype and then you test it, and then someone says, that doesn't work. Maybe you need to rethink your definition, or maybe you need to think your empathy. So it is very much a process where you go back and forth all the time. Now, we're going to describe all these stages in detail in the next slides. Is there any questions so far? Anyone? Give it a second because I see some people typing. All right, perfect. Let's move on. Okay, so let's dig into this amazing process. First stage of the design thinking, empathy. In this phase of the design thinking process, in the first phase, which to me is the most crucial phase and probably the phase that lasts longest, is the observation phase. Here, you're supposed to understand what is it that you're going to do, who you're going to find a solution for, what context is this person based. So essentially the basic questions: what, who, when, where, and how. There are some methodologies to do this. For me, the empathy phase is nothing more than a good conversation. So if you sit in front of someone and you just listen wisely to what they have to say, you're certainly going to gather enough information to move on to the next processes. The purpose of empathy is so that you don't make any assumptions or judgments around possible solutions before the perfect time. It is true that nowadays in a world where there's a lot of startups, there's a lot of founders, and I apologize if there are founders in the conversation and you feel that that could be you, but there's a lot of founders that try to find solutions for problems that they don't understand deeply. And it happens that most of these startups fail, and quite quickly, actually. So the purpose of the empathy is that so you have so much context that there's no doubt of where you should be going. Again, thinking of that box, knowing that box so well that whatever solution you come up with is going to fit it perfectly. Another way of discovering a bit more about the context is doing surveys. Surveys is a bit of a closed format where you ask specific questions and you also expect a certain kind of answers. For those who are curious, or if you don't know how to do a survey, there is a technique called the Lean Survey Canvas. I can also write it down on the chat later on, which helps you create great surveys, or at least the most productive surveys. Surveys are something that not most users like to respond. So if you're in doubt on how to do it, this is a good way to approach it. There's also field observation, when you literally put yourself in the context, in the environment that you want to observe, and you literally just sit back and just watch what's happening and write it down and take notes. And for those who come from the business perspective, there's also benchmarking, SWOT analysis, and some other tools and techniques that will help you gather information. So here the purpose, again, just to recap, is to gather as much information as possible. Now, some people ask me, so how long should this information gathering last? There isn't really a predefined time. The important thing is that you find a moment where you should stop researching, and then you should be able to go to the next step. That doesn't mean the information that you have is enough. It only means that you need to be able to move on. Otherwise, the research is never ending. There's always so much information about everything that you need to make sure that you have a certain time constraint to be able to move on with the process. Any questions so far, anyone? I saw there was someone typing. Exactly. David said it perfectly. You should have the perfect mix between quality and quantity. So there are some cases in the design thinking where there's a mediator doing the process with a team of professionals, and he will probably be the one, or he or she will probably be the one giving a time constraint for you to move on to the next stage. In the company that I work for, we have usually a 2-week process, design process. So we try to do the research in 2 to 3 days, not longer than that. Otherwise, you're just digging in too deep and never moving forward. Once you define what's your time constraint and what's the right time to move forward, and as David said, you have the perfect mix between quality and quantity, you're going to move to the definition stage. The definition stage is where you're going to sit down, analyze, and synthesize everything that you have observed in the previous stage. Here is a really important step for you to define who you're going to solve the problems for and what are your problems. It is very true that most people that start applying design thinking for the first time, they think they're going to solve all problems for everyone, and that's just not possible. We don't have enough time and we don't have enough money, that's true, to implement all solutions for all problems. So we need to be very critical when we prioritize what makes sense to work on at this specific moment. A few of the ways that you can do that is through these 4 tools that I have here. These are just 4 that I use the most, but there's so many others out there. So if you're curious, feel free to research a bit more. These are the ones that I feel work for my work. The first one is empathy mapping, and here's an example of it. Empathy mapping is a way of distributing what people tell you around the problem that you are investigating. One thing that it's really important to keep in mind is that people usually say one thing and do another thing. And a good example of this is when you ask people how often they work out. Most people are going to say, I work out once a week. But when you ask them, what was the last time you worked out? Some people are going to say, last year. So here you have 2 very different information. This person is telling you they work out once a week, but the last time they actually worked out was a year ago. See how these are different ways of interpreting the information. So this map is good for you to separate what is actions that people do, things that people say, how they feel, and how they think. We're going to describe a little bit how to use this later on, but this is just to help you separate the information that you have. Any questions about empathy mapping? I see that Gunnar is typing. I can wait for you. No, I'm going to move on, and we can come back. All right, so the second tool that I edit here is Affinity Diagrams, and this is probably one of the things that all of you have seen, and this is one of the things that make design thinking, which is the wonderful wall of Post-its. This is basically just a way of categorizing the information that you have. So there aren't a specific set of categories that you're going to use. You're going to have to define your own categories, but this is a really nice tool to visualize things that have a bigger amount of Post-its. Usually, this is not a rule, but usually, if you have a group of categories that have a lot of Post-its in it, you should look closer, because if you have a lot of information, there might be something in there that you should be investigating. The Post-its is already, yes, Lucrecia says this is the IDEO method. Yes. Lucrecia is asking if this is the IDEO method. It is. So this is a good way also to show the other people that are not necessarily involved in design thinking how you prioritize the problems that you're going to solve. If you show them a wall where there's a category with 1 Post-it, that's probably not the way to go. But if you show them a category with a lot of Post-its, with a lot of information, that's more towards what you should be solving or you should be looking at with more attention in more details. All right, the third tool that I added here is user persona. User persona, as I say, could be a talk on its own because it's a really complex tool to master. But just for you to understand, user persona serves as a way to symbolize your users into one single character. So the user persona should be as specific as possible for you to really know who you're solving the problem for, but not so close to you that you get attached to it. I hope that makes sense. So one of the rules of user persona is should not be a person that you know. It should not be a photo of a person that you know. It should not be a name that you're familiar with. You should not be describing personalities that are around you. This person represents the group of people that will be your target users or the people that you're going to be solving the problem for. Yes, David is asking if I could do a multi-academy on user personas. Yes, we can certainly do that. There are tons of techniques to define user personas. But one thing that you should really leave this talk knowing about user personas is that this is a really good way to communicate your problems and your solutions to other people. So if you describe your solution by using, in this case, David Miller, it's easier to understand who is actually being affected by the problems that you're trying to solve. All right, the last, and for me, one of the most important parts of the definition stage is problem statement. The problem statement is a phrase that lets everyone know who the user is, what problem you're trying to solve, and why you're going to solve it. And I actually added here an example just so that it's easier to visualize. This was a problem statement done by the Spotify team. And it says, users who like to listen to music and podcasts need to be able to easily search their playlists and libraries, because having to search more than one collection in different locations can be irritating and difficult. So here the users are super clear. They're not talking about all Spotify users. They're talking about people that like to listen to music and podcasts, right? So there's a separation here. They're not talking about people that come and only listen to music, or people that come and only listen to podcasts. Now, they're also adding here, they need to be able to easily search their playlists and library. That's the problem, because there probably is some difficulty around finding these playlists and libraries, because having to search can be irritating and difficult. So they probably identify on their research that people are getting really irritated and are probably leaving the experience too soon because they cannot find what they want. Any questions on the problem statement? There is another thing I didn't add here on the slide, but there's another way to do the structure of this phrase. So the phrase is the same, but you can start it, you can create it as a question. So how might we design thinkers help a user to solve this problem because they're having a specific difficulty or a specific obstacle? So just to change it up, the problem statement in the form of a question. If you have any questions about that, you can look it up, how might we problem statements, and you can find more information around that. Just to recap for a second, these are not things that you are going to come up on your own. Everything that you add into a problem statement is part of your research and definition stages. You're going to have to research so well, define it so well, and then create your problem statement. Yes, that's very true. Stefan is mentioning that it sounds like a user story statement from Scrum framework. It's super similar, Stefan. That's right. In the end, it's kind of like the same idea where we're trying to solve a specific user story, in this case, a specific user problem. So we try to make it as clear and as simple so that the entire team knows what they're working towards. All right. Now, once this is clear, you have your user, you have your problem, you have your reason why you're actually doing all this process, we're going to move into the ideation process. Personally, this is my favorite stage. This is the stage where I go wild. But it's really important to know that it's only here, not a single step before this, that you will start thinking about ideas. I know it's human nature to start thinking about solutions as soon as we hear there's a problem. But there's a reason why we take all this time to then start thinking about solutions. So as you probably understand by now, you're equipped with so much information that, again, let's think about the box. You're going to find solutions and ideas that fit the box. It is true that in the early stages of the ideation, you can run wild. You can just create whatever ideas, whatever crazy ideas you want, as long as you're always keeping in mind the user and the problem that you had before. Here I added the 3 most common ideation tools usually used by UX designers. There are some others, but I feel these are the most effective ones. And I think brainstorming, everyone knows about brainstorming. And for that specific reason, I decided to add a specific slide on notes on brainstorming, because I feel that not everyone is doing it correctly, if I may say. So David is asking, we should think MVP first, isn't it? Not yet, David. We're going to get into MVP. in a second. So before thinking MVP, let's think about ideas. So brainstorming should be a place with no criticism and no judgment, right? You should step into a brainstorming room without any preconceived ideas or any preconceived criticisms. Here's a place to go crazy and wacky. And again, we want quantity over quality. It doesn't really matter if your idea is feasible at this point. It only matters that you bring ideas to the table. There's a technique that I like a lot to apply in my brainstorming sessions, which is build on top of each other. If someone brings an idea to the table, make sure that you're constructing on top of it instead of rejecting it. And one way of doing this is, instead of saying, no, but that idea is not so good, is to switch it around and say, yes, and let's do that. So if someone says, the sky should be blue, you will say, yes, the sky should be blue and should have green clouds. So try to build on top of that. That changes completely the atmosphere of the brainstorming and just makes people want to give more and pour more. Crazy ideas are certainly included in here. One rule that seems obvious, but not everyone in a brainstorm remembers, it's one person speaking at a time. It's quite easy to just get on a mumble if everyone is throwing ideas on the table, but it's important to respect the ideas of everyone, so you can actually just do this build on top of each other in a well done manner. These are just tools that work for me, and I feel that they have worked in the teams that I worked before. So if you can apply them, I can guarantee you're going to have a very productive brainstorming session. Here is also important to have a certain time constraint. It's really fun to produce ideas, but you also need to limit a point where you're going to be able to move to the next stage. Before we move to the next stage, I just want to show one other way of doing ideation. So we do have the worst possible idea, and it's exactly what it says, is to come up, the first idea that you come up is the worst possible. And psychology says that everything else after the worst possible idea will be a good idea. So why not try with the worst first? And okay, and then the final tool that we have is the Crazy Eights. The Crazy Eights is widely used by digital designers, designers that do applications and websites. But I've seen product designers use it as well, so it might be useful for a lot of people. And it's basically a big paper divided into 8 small parts. And the idea is that you sketch your solution in a minute. 1 solution per minute. So by the end of the 8 minutes, you're going to have 8 different solutions. The idea is that, of course, that you change them up as you go. And the point of doing this is that so if you cannot explain your ideas in a rational manner or in a verbal manner, you can draw them much easier. You can actually show them to other people and then receive feedback. So this is called the Crazy Eights methodology. Also, if you have more interest about this, YouTube, they're going to show you a really nice demo on how to do it. It's also a really fun exercise. Any questions so far? We're ready to move on. Great. I'm going to move on. Now we're going to get to David's question of the MVP. Now is the time where we're going to start building stuff. This is the prototype stage. Prototyping offers the opportunity to bring all of these crazy ideas to life, test it, and then potentially investigate how a sample of users think and feel about a product. So this is a stage where everyone is going to sit down and put their hands on. I get asked very, very often, why is it important to build it? And the reason why is because when you build, you think. When you put your hands in to build something or drawing something or designing something digitally, you're actually putting your ideas together and actually thinking about the logic behind it. So it's a good way to visualize it. It's also a good way to communicate it to people that have not been involved in the design thinking process and haven't seen everything that you've seen before. It happens a lot in startups that there are some people thinking about a solution, but maybe the business team hasn't been involved. And then when you talk to them about solutions, they will probably reject it because they haven't seen it. So it's a good way to show them visually what you've been thinking. It's also a good way to fail quickly and cheap. The idea of the prototype is that you don't spend a lot of time and that you don't spend a lot of money in it. In digital design, there's some divisions on this. You can do a low fidelity, a mid fidelity, and a high fidelity, but this is another conversation. In general, if you're prototyping things, you should do it as quick as possible to show. And if it's rejected, you can just iterate on something else and move on. This also, the last reason why I added here also comes from the Scrum mentality, which is to chop big problems into small ones. So instead of creating the internet from zero, let's see what we can do in a small amount of time and test, and then move on from there. Scrum does the same. Scrum divides it into sprints. Let's see what we can do in a sprint, test it, put it out there, see if it works, and move on, right? This is the idea, again, of the prototype. If there are more questions about the UX, the UI design, or the digital design prototypes, I have more references about this, and I can send over to whoever is interested, because there are some differences of prototyping digitally for digital design than for product design. But the idea is always the same. Build to think, communicate, fail quickly and cheap, and chop big problems into small pieces. Any questions? Candy, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. How much time normally takes for this step? It depends on what you're building, right? So if you're building a product, an actual, real, physical product, it might take a bit longer because you need to actually find the correct material and so on and so forth. For design, I can give you from my professional perspective, we usually take 1 or 2 days to design up to a mid-fidelity, what we call a mid-fidelity prototype, and then we're ready to present to the client or to the team. It kind of depends more on what is it that you're prototyping, but it shouldn't be too long. If you look it up on Ideo, the company that we mentioned at the beginning, if you look it up on their YouTube channel, they have an exercise on prototypation where they prototype a real live supermarket cart in a week, I think it is. So the idea is that you actually move fast in this stage too. Miguel, you're asking about user testing. We're getting to that in a second. Yes, testing will be the next step. I'm happy that there's a lot of people that know it already. So yes, now with this prototype in hands, this is the time to go outside of the bubble, outside of your design thinking group, and test it. The purpose of the testing, it is, of course, to generate feedback, of course. But it's also a really important step for you to regain a bit more information about your users. When you see a user interacting with the product that you created, you actually discover a lot about them. And sometimes things that they didn't mention when you first talked to them in the interviews will be very, very clear when they interact with the product or with the solution. And that's one of the reasons why I added these tips on the black box. The reason of the prototype is that you show this product or the experience to the user, but you don't tell the user anything about it. So if the first reaction of the user is not understanding what he has to do, you have your first problem and you should go back to the drawing board, right? Your product, your experience, or whatever it is that you're trying to solve right here should be so obvious that the user will immediately interact with it or do something that you're expecting with it. It's really important. I know it's really hard, but it's really important not to react, right? Oh no, you should be doing this or you should be doing that. The user shouldn't be doing anything. He will be doing what he feels like doing, and that's what you should be observing, right? If he's doing something completely wrong, then it's your fault and not his. Another thing that helps out in this process is asking the user to talk through his experience. So in the case of mobile applications, for example, when we do testing, we ask users to literally say it out loud. What are the things that they're clicking on? So let's say that we're testing Spotify. The user will say, I'm opening this playlist. Now I'm scrolling up because I'm looking for a specific song. Now I'm going to click on this song. I'm going to listen to the song, or I'm going to pause the song. So literally ask him to describe step by step. It sounds very tedious, but it's actually super helpful to see if your logic actually applies to what the user is thinking and feeling while he's doing. The third tip is obvious: observation, always observation, no criticism, no judgment, no assistance. The observation here is also important for you to look at the expressions that the person is making. Humans are very expressive, and maybe they're going through the process in a very easy manner, but they look angry or they look frustrated with something. So it's nice to notice even the small details. In UX UI design, we have well, there are some questions about about this, but there's a way of testing things with users that is literally just turning on their camera and watching how their eyes move or how their faces reacts to certain elements in the screen. This can be super, super useful. And finally, if you have the opportunity to talk to the person doing this testing, ask follow-up questions. It's nice that you have some questions already prepared. So if there is some doubts in the prototype stage that you would like to clarify, this will be the place and the time to ask the user. And also let the user, I call the user because I'm coming from the UX lingo, but it can be the person, the client, whoever it is that you're trying to solve the problem. If they have questions to you, that's also really nice to listen, because sometimes when they ask questions, they trigger you to think in a different way. Christina, I hope I'm saying this right, is asking, any prototyping app you recommend for Adobe XD designs? I know InVision, but it doesn't work with Adobe XD. If I'm not mistaken, you can actually do prototype within Adobe. I actually don't use Adobe XD in my day-to-day work, so I am not 100% sure. Let me investigate that, Christina, and we can have a discussion afterwards if you want. Yeah, I'm kind of saying I use Figma and Sketch for those that work with digital design, which are great tools that you can already prototype on it. Otherwise, InVision is a good tool to do it too. I get a stat saying 5 users can be enough to detect 85% of problems. It is true. It is true that the bigger the pool, the better. Always, but the number that I go by when we do testing in our projects is between 5 and 8, just because you can have a bigger and a broader pool of backgrounds and cultural experiences and so on and so forth. This is something that we try to apply in all our projects. Great, I think I ran through all the stages. We actually arrived through the end of the design thinking process. Now, everything from here is what we call iteration, right? It will happen very, very often that you're working, that you might be working for a company that already has some of these steps done, empathy and definition, and it will be your job to ideate, prototype, and test. Maybe you don't have enough information when you test, so you need to go back to empathy. Maybe you need to define something better, so you need to go back to definition. So it is truly a never-ending process. And if I may recommend you a great TED Talk about this process, look it up for the product designers on Netflix. They apply design thinking daily for a lot of projects, but they also apply design thinking daily for a specific feature. It's really, really wonderful to listen to their process, and you will see that it can solve almost anything. It won't be able to solve a math equation because that has a specific solution, but almost anything else. Yes, so we do have, yes, there you go, David. Thank you so much. You're officially hired as my assistant. Yes. Digital Thinkers, Design Like a Scientist. This is an amazing talk. I really, really recommend it. So they're talking, of course, about digital products, but it can certainly be applied to whatever problems you're trying to solve. And I'm going to leave you now my contacts, and I'm going to open the chat for questions and doubts. If you have any questions about the UX UI experience and the design thinking this is the moment. And I hope I was clear enough about the stages. As I said in the beginning, these are tools that I use on my day-to-day life, but there are thousands of different other tools and techniques for each of these stages. You just have to find the ones that fit the problem that you're trying to solve. If you are interested, UX designers produce a lot of content around design thinking. So if you go on on Medium, you're certainly going to find a lot of things out there. And I hope I managed to encourage you to use it in your personal or in your professional life, and I hope it solves all the problems you have. Let's see if there's any question coming.
Thank you, Ananda. I think you were answering all of the questions when you were speaking, but if anyone wants to do new questions, so if wants that Ananda go deep in anything, just go ahead. It's the time. Here they are asking if they can get the presentation. If I will, sure, it is not problem. If you contact me or contact Ananda, we can send you the PPT without problems.
Yes, and also here you can find my contact information. I'm open to give mentoring for new UX designers applying design thinking, so feel free to reach out if you need any assistance. And yes, thanks for participating, everyone.
Any more questions? It's your time.
Jorge is asking, you said a couple of days for the prototype, then you make prototype for every step of the product. Jorge, it depends on the product that you're working with. For example, in the app, what we do is we prototype a couple screens, or the screens that we judge are the most important ones. And once we have enough feedback, we can move forward with the rest of the design. So the idea is that we just make sure the design we created makes sense, and then we move on. But it certainly depends on the product that you have.
Everyone said that it's a really good and interesting talk, so thank you so much, Ananda. If they understand it, then it's like, I think it was the goal, right?
Yeah, exactly. What is the ideal number of people, Patrick? For what? For a design thinking group, you mean? Working on a project. The design thinking process, you can actually do it on your own. I know a couple of startup founders that have applied it on their own and have done it on their own. Of course, it takes a bit more time. It also depends on the project that you're working for. Yes, and the multi-economy on user personas. We could certainly think about that. There's some more people typing. Nope, I think we're good.
Okay, so if there is no more questions, I think we can end this multi-academy. Thank you so much again, Ananda. If you want to give like the mail or your LinkedIn or something here, go ahead. And everyone, anyone who wants a presentation, I leave my mail, so you can contact me directly. And if you want something more also, if you want to be a speaker of a new multi-academy, if you want to be a freelancer and need help, you can also contact me. And thank you so much to everyone to stay here today. And I hope see you soon in a new multi-academy.
Thank you, Magda. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.